The morning of January 22, 1943, the jungle west of Point Cruz, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant John George pressed his body flat against the shattered concrete of a Japanese bunker, feeling the tropical heat radiate through his sweat-soaked fatigues. Somewhere in the green canopy ahead, a Japanese sniper waited. Over the past 72 hours, that sniper, and 10 others like him, had eliminated 14 Americans. 14 men who had stepped into the wrong patch of sunlight, turned their heads at the wrong moment, or simply moved when they should have remained still. George brought his rifle slowly to his shoulder, a Winchester Model 70 fitted with a Lyman Alaskan scope, a civilian bolt-action hunting rifle he had purchased with 2 years of National Guard pay. His commanding officer had called it a toy. Captain Morris had ordered him to leave the mail-order sweetheart in his tent and carry a real weapon. His fellow platoon leaders had laughed when he unpacked the wooden crate marked Fragile at the supply depot 6 weeks earlier. A sporting rifle, they said, had no place in modern warfare. If you are watching this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Now let us return to that morning in the jungle where everything was about to change. John George had not come to Guadalcanal to prove a point. He had come to fight, and he had brought the tool he trusted most. Back in Illinois before the war, George had been a state rifle champion, a marksman who understood the intimate relationship between shooter and weapon. The standard issue rifles available to American soldiers were fine weapons. The M1 Garand was a semi-automatic marvel that gave American infantrymen a significant advantage in firepower. The Springfield 1903 was a proven bolt-action design that had served through 2 world wars. But George knew something that the supply officers and the equipment boards did not fully appreciate. Accuracy was not merely about the rifle. It was about the entire system, the weapon, the optic, the ammunition, and most critically, the man behind the trigger. His Winchester Model 70, chambered in .30-06, was not a military rifle. It was a hunter's rifle, designed for precision shots at game that would not wait for a second attempt. The Lyman Alaskan scope mounted on top gave him magnification that the iron-sighted Garands could not match, and George himself had spent years learning to use this exact combination until the rifle became an extension of his own body. The 132nd Infantry Regiment had arrived on Guadalcanal in early December of 1942, relieving exhausted Marine units that had been fighting on the island since August. The Marines had secured Henderson Field and held the perimeter against relentless Japanese counterattacks, but thousands of enemy soldiers remained in the jungle, determined to retake the airfield or perish trying. The Army's task was to finish what the Marines had started, to push into the interior and eliminate Japanese resistance. The campaign had immediately become a nightmare. The jungle around Mount Austin was some of the most difficult terrain American soldiers had ever encountered. Dense vegetation reduced visibility to mere yards. Ravines and ridgelines created natural defensive positions that the Japanese exploited with lethal efficiency. And, above all, there were the snipers. Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal were not the elite marksmen that popular culture might imagine. Most were regular infantry soldiers assigned to sniper duty, armed with the Arisaka Type 99 rifle, fitted with a 2.5-power telescopic sight. Their equipment was inferior to what American forces would eventually deploy, but they possessed 2 advantages that made them devastating. First, patience. Japanese snipers would position themselves in trees or camouflaged ground positions and wait for hours, sometimes days, for a single shot. Second, concealment. The dense jungle canopy provided perfect cover, and the Japanese had learned to tie themselves into trees so that even a fatal hit would not cause them to fall and reveal their position. In the weeks leading up to January 22, Japanese snipers operating near Point Cruz had created a zone of terror for the 132nd Infantry. Men were afraid to move during daylight. Officers could not expose themselves to observe enemy positions. The simple act of retrieving water from a stream had become a potentially fatal mission. Morale was collapsing. Something had to change. George had requested permission to conduct counter-sniper operations days earlier. His request had been denied. His rifle was not standard issue. It was not even military property. The logistics of supporting a non-standard weapon system were complicated. What if he needed replacement parts? What if he ran out of ammunition compatible with his rifle? These concerns were valid from a supply perspective, but they ignored a fundamental truth. Men were dying, and George believed he could stop it. The morning of the 22nd, George acted without official permission. He took his Winchester, his scope, his carefully hoarded ammunition, and moved into the jungle toward the last known position of enemy sniper activity. His spotter, a sergeant with field binoculars, accompanied him. Together, they entered the green hell where 11 Japanese marksmen waited. The first kill came at 8:47 in the morning. George had been scanning the tree line for nearly an hour when his spotter detected movement. A Japanese soldier, hidden in the fork of a large tree approximately 200 yards distant, was adjusting his position. The movement was minimal, a slight shift of weight that caused a branch to sway unnaturally against the still morning air. Most observers would have missed it. The spotter did not. He whispered the position to George, who had already begun tracking the movement through his scope. Through the Lyman Alaskan, George could see what the naked eye could not. The outline of a human form against the bark, the glint of metal that might have been a rifle barrel, the slight difference in color between military fabric and natural vegetation. He steadied his breathing, feeling his heartbeat slow as years of training took over. The Winchester's trigger broke cleanly. The rifle cracked, sending a .30-06 round across 200 yards of humid jungle air. The Japanese sniper slumped in his tree, held in place by the ropes that had been meant to keep him hidden even in death. There was no time to celebrate. The shot had revealed George's position to every enemy soldier within earshot. He and his spotter moved immediately, displacing to a secondary position they had identified earlier. The jungle erupted with return fire, bullets snapping through vegetation where George had been seconds before. But he was already gone, already setting up for his next engagement. The second Japanese sniper made the mistake of firing at George's former position. The muzzle flash betrayed him, a brief flicker of light in the shadows that lasted less than a heartbeat. But a heartbeat was enough. George marked the location, waited for the echo of the shot to fade, and began his stalk. It took 20 minutes to work into a position with a clear firing lane. 20 minutes of crawling through undergrowth, of freezing motionless when enemy soldiers passed nearby, of controlling his breathing despite the suffocating heat. When he finally had the angle, the Japanese sniper was scanning the jungle with his rifle scope, searching for movement. George fired. The second sniper fell. By noon, George had eliminated 4 Japanese marksmen. Word had spread through the enemy positions that something was different today. The Americans had found someone who could fight their kind of war. The remaining snipers became cautious, abandoning their normal positions, seeking deeper concealment. This made them less effective, but also harder to find. George adapted. Instead of waiting for targets to reveal themselves, he began to predict where they would hide. He studied the terrain, identified positions that offered good fields of fire and adequate cover, and focused his attention on those locations. His understanding of sniper craft, developed through years of hunting and competition shooting, allowed him to think like his opponents. The afternoon brought the most dangerous engagement. George was working his way along a rocky drainage channel when Japanese machine gun fire raked the rocks where he had been positioned moments earlier. Someone had spotted his movement. He pressed himself into the mud at the bottom of the channel, making himself as small as possible, while bullets cracked overhead. Then the fire stopped. George knew what that meant. The machine gunner had been suppressing him while a sniper moved into position for the kill shot. The hunter had become the hunted. George forced himself to remain still, analyzing the situation through sound alone. He could hear movement to his east, the soft scrape of equipment against vegetation that told him the Japanese sniper was approaching. The enemy marksman knew approximately where George was hiding. He was working his way along the most likely escape route, anticipating where an American would go to find cover. It was exactly what George would have done. The Japanese sniper was good, but George was better. Instead of fleeing east as expected, George had moved north, working his way through the drainage channel to a position that the Japanese sniper would have to pass to reach George's original hiding spot. The mathematics of counter-sniper warfare are brutal. Both shooters are trying to predict the other's movements. Both are seeking that one moment of advantage that will allow a clean shot. The winner is usually the one who better understands his opponent's thinking. At 10:03, the Japanese sniper reached the rocks where George had initially taken cover. He moved into the position, scanning east toward the drainage ditch where he expected to find his quarry. He never looked north. George's shot struck him in the side of the head. 5 kills by mid-afternoon. Take a moment now to hit that subscribe button if you are enjoying this account. The story is far from over, and what happened next would reshape American tactics throughout the Pacific theater. The Japanese response to George's rampage was immediate and violent. Knee mortars began shelling the area around his position, their distinctive thumping sound echoing through the jungle. They had deduced his approximate location from the sound of his shots and were attempting to neutralize him with indirect fire. George and his spotter withdrew, moving back toward American lines as mortar rounds cratered the jungle behind them. That evening, George reported to Colonel Ferry, the regimental commander. Ferry had received reports throughout the day of the sniper kills. He had one question. Could George train other men to do what he had done? George said he could try, but it would require time, rifles with optics, and men who could already shoot. Ferry told him that Division had 14 Springfield rifles with Unertl scopes, sniper rifles left behind by the Marines who had been evacuated from the island. He also had 40 men in the regiment who had qualified as expert marksmen before deployment. The ingredients for a sniper section were available. What had been missing was someone who understood how to use them. The decision to formalize sniper operations was not made lightly. American military doctrine in 1943 did not emphasize individual marksmanship in the way that German or Soviet forces did. The American way of war relied on firepower, on the coordinated application of artillery, air support, and automatic weapons to overwhelm enemy positions. The idea that a single soldier with a bolt-action rifle could significantly affect the battlefield seemed almost primitive, but Guadalcanal was teaching harsh lessons about jungle warfare. Firepower was of limited use when you could not see your targets. Artillery could not hit positions hidden under triple canopy jungle. Air support could not distinguish between enemy soldiers and the trees that concealed them. In this environment, the individual marksman became a decisive weapon system. George returned to the jungle the next morning, January 23rd. The remaining Japanese snipers knew he was coming. They had adjusted their tactics, abandoning the elevated tree positions that had proven so vulnerable, moving into ground-level hides that offered better concealment. But concealment is not the same as invisibility. Every position has weaknesses. Every hide can be found by someone who knows what to look for. Over the next 2 days, George eliminated 6 more Japanese snipers. His methods varied depending on the situation. Sometimes he waited in ambush, allowing enemy movement to reveal positions. Sometimes he stalked forward, using his understanding of terrain to predict where opponents would hide. Sometimes he simply trusted his instincts, that indefinable sense developed over years of hunting that told him when something in the environment was not quite right. By January 25th, 11 Japanese snipers had been eliminated. The threat to the 132nd Infantry near Point Cruz had been neutralized. American soldiers could move again. Officers could observe enemy positions without fear of instant death. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was equally significant. They had believed their snipers were invincible in the jungle environment. That belief had been shattered by a single American with a mail-order hunting rifle. Training began on January 27th. George assembled 40 expert marksmen at a makeshift range 2 miles east of Henderson Field. These men could shoot. They had qualified with iron sights at ranges up to 500 yards, but marksmanship on a known distance range under controlled conditions was vastly different from combat sniping in the jungle. George had to teach them everything else. The first lesson was equipment. The 14 Springfield rifles with unertl scopes were precision instruments that required careful handling. The scopes had to be zeroed, their adjustments calibrated to match the individual rifle and the ammunition being used. George showed the trainees how to care for the optics in the humid jungle environment, how to prevent fogging, how to protect the lenses from damage during movement. He explained the ballistics of the .30-06 round at various ranges, how the bullet dropped over distance, how wind affected trajectory, how heat distortion could make targets appear to be where they were not. The second lesson was concealment. A sniper who could be seen was a dead sniper. George taught his students to select positions that offered cover, concealment, and a clear field of fire. He showed them how to construct hides using natural vegetation, how to move through the jungle without leaving obvious trails, how to remain motionless for hours while waiting for a target. He emphasized the importance of patience, of resisting the urge to shoot at marginal targets that might reveal their position without achieving a significant result. The third lesson was target selection. Not every enemy soldier was worth a shot. Junior enlisted men could be replaced easily. Officers, radio operators, machine gunners, these were the targets that affected enemy capability. George taught his students to observe before shooting, to identify high-value targets by their equipment, their behavior, their position within the enemy formation. The fourth lesson was counter-sniping. The greatest threat to a sniper was another sniper. George shared what he had learned in his engagements, how enemy snipers thought, how they positioned themselves, how they could be located and eliminated. He stressed the importance of displacing after each shot, of never firing from the same position twice, of always having a planned escape route. The sniper section conducted its first coordinated operation on February 2nd. George led a team of 8 trained snipers into the jungle near the Tenambogo River. Over the following days, they engaged Japanese forces 12 times. Small skirmishes, ambushes, quick firefights, followed by rapid withdrawal. The results exceeded expectations. 23 Japanese soldiers killed on the first day alone, 0 American casualties. By February 9th, the sniper section had confirmed 74 Japanese kills. The actual number was likely higher, as kills could only be confirmed when the body was visible. Enemy soldiers hid in dense vegetation often could not be counted. The psychological impact was even greater than the casualty figures suggested. Japanese commanders had modified their tactical behavior, restricting movement during daylight, requiring soldiers to travel in larger groups, abandoning positions that had previously been considered secure. The success of the sniper section attracted attention from higher headquarters. Other units requested similar training. Officers who had dismissed George's mail-order rifle as a toy began to reconsider their assumptions about precision marksmanship. The Winchester Model 70, a civilian hunting rifle that the military had officially rejected as unsuitable for service use, had proven itself in the harshest combat conditions imaginable. The official military position on the Model 70 was complicated. In November 1942, Captain George Van Orden and Gunnery Sergeant Calvin Lloyd had written a 72-page report titled Equipment for the American Sniper, which concluded that the Winchester Model 70, topped with an 8-power inertial scope, was the best sniping combination available. The Marine Corps had actually purchased 373 Model 70s in May 1942, recognizing their potential value. But the rifles were never officially adopted. A memo dated July 29, 1942, had rejected the Model 70 as unsuitable for general service use, citing concerns about durability, parts interchangeability, and ammunition supply. These concerns were not unreasonable from a logistics perspective. The military supply system was designed to support standard equipment. Introducing non-standard weapons complicated maintenance, repair, and ammunition distribution. In a global war with millions of soldiers spread across multiple continents, standardization saved lives by ensuring that any rifle could be repaired with available parts and fed with available ammunition. But the memo had also claimed that the standard Springfield sniper rifle was superior to the Model 70 in both accuracy and durability. This claim was questionable at best. The Model 70 was, according to the Marine Corps' own evaluation, the most accurate American-made, caliber .30 rifle on the market. Its controlled feed action was exceptionally reliable. Its trigger could be adjusted to a clean, predictable break that facilitated precision shooting. The commercial market had spent decades refining the bolt-action sporting rifle into a precision instrument. Military sniper rifles, by contrast, were typically modified versions of standard infantry weapons, compromises between accuracy and durability, that satisfied neither requirement perfectly. Despite the official rejection, Model 70s continued to appear in combat zones throughout the Pacific. Peter Senek, a sniper historian, documented that a fair number of unauthorized telescope-equipped Model 70s brought the reality of war to Japanese combat personnel during the early stages of the war in the South Pacific. Officers like John George brought their personal weapons. Marines found Model 70s in supply depots and put them to use. The gap between official policy and battlefield reality widened as the war progressed. George's actions on Guadalcanal were cut short on February 7th. He was operating near the Tenambago River when a Japanese rifleman shot him. The bullet struck George in the left shoulder. The impact spun him around and knocked him to the ground. His spotter, a man named Hayes, dragged George to cover and called for a medic. The wound was serious, but not fatal. George was evacuated to a field hospital and then to a rear area medical facility for recovery. His departure did not end the sniper program he had created. The men he had trained continued operations. The tactics he had developed were disseminated to other units. The success of precision marksmanship on Guadalcanal influenced American doctrine for the remainder of the Pacific War, and George himself was not finished fighting. After recovering from his wound, George was assigned to one of the most famous and dangerous units of the war, Merrill's Marauders. Officially designated the 5,307th Composite Unit, Merrill's Marauders were a long-range penetration force operating in the China-Burma-India theater. Their mission was to move deep behind Japanese lines, cutting supply routes and creating chaos in the enemy rear. It was exactly the kind of warfare where George's skills would be most valuable. Burma presented different challenges than Guadalcanal. The patrols lasted weeks instead of days. Distances were measured in hundreds of miles instead of hundreds of yards. Every ounce of weight mattered when soldiers had to carry everything they needed through mountainous jungle terrain. George adapted his equipment accordingly. He removed the Lyman Alaskan scope from his Winchester and replaced it with a lighter Weaver 330. The reduced magnification was a compromise, but the weight savings made the rifle sustainable for extended operations. The Marauders campaign was brutal. Disease claimed more casualties than combat. Supply was sporadic. Medical evacuation was often impossible. Men fought until they dropped, and sometimes they dropped without ever seeing an enemy. Through it all, George continued to employ the precision marksmanship skills he had honed on Guadalcanal. His rifle, the mail-order sweetheart that his fellow officers had mocked, accompanied him through some of the most grueling combat of the entire war. George survived the war and documented his experiences in a book titled Shots Fired in Anger. The book became a classic of military literature, valued both for its tactical insights and its honest portrayal of combat. George wrote about the reality of looking through a scope at another human being and pulling the trigger. He wrote about the fear, the exhaustion, the moral weight of killing at a distance. He wrote about the strengths and weaknesses of American tactics, equipment, and leadership. He praised Japanese soldiers for their fieldcraft and courage while criticizing their rigid adherence to tactics that cost them needless casualties. The book's influence extended far beyond its initial readership. Military professionals studied George's accounts of counter-sniper warfare. Firearms enthusiasts appreciated his detailed analysis of rifle performance under combat conditions. Historians valued his first-hand perspective on campaigns that were often overshadowed by the larger battles in Europe and the Pacific. Shots Fired in Anger remains in print today, still read by those seeking to understand the personal experience of combat. Take a moment now to subscribe if you have not already. Let me know in the comments what aspect of this story resonates with you. Was it the individual courage, the tactical innovation, or perhaps the unexpected superiority of a civilian rifle over military equipment? The broader implications of George's experience extended well beyond Guadalcanal. His success with the Winchester Model 70 contributed to a gradual shift in American military thinking about precision marksmanship. During the Korean War, Model 70s were again considered for sniper use, though they were ultimately passed over in favor of modified Garands. The reasons were familiar: logistics, standardization, the reluctance to introduce non-standard equipment into the supply system. But the Model 70 story did not end there. When American forces became increasingly involved in Vietnam in the 1960s, the need for accurate sniper rifles became acute. The rifles sent to Vietnam for sniping use were from stocks originally procured for Marine Corps match use. Major Jim Land, who established the Marine Corps' Vietnam-era sniper program, scrounged Model 70s from various sources, including rifles that had been purchased for deer hunting at Camp Pendleton. Through the exchange system in Okinawa, his men bought mounts, rings, and scopes. The improvised sniper rifles that resulted were not standardized military equipment. They were adaptations, compromises, solutions crafted by men who needed effective weapons and could not wait for the procurement system to provide them. The most famous sniper of the Vietnam War, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, used a Winchester Model 70. Hathcock compiled 93 confirmed kills during his tours in Vietnam, though his actual total was likely much higher. His exploits became legendary, including a celebrated shot in which he eliminated an enemy sniper by firing through the opponent's scope. The bullet traveled down the optical tube and struck the enemy marksman in the eye. This shot was only possible because both snipers were aiming at each other at the same instant, meaning Hathcock had been microseconds from death himself. Hathcock's rifle was not significantly different from the one John George had carried on Guadalcanal 2 decades earlier. The Winchester action, the .30-06 cartridge, the precision barrel, the quality optic, these elements combined to create a weapon system that exceeded anything the military had officially adopted. The Model 70 represented the pinnacle of American sporting rifle development, a design refined over decades by commercial market competition. Military procurement processes, constrained by standardization requirements and bureaucratic inertia, could not replicate this excellence. The Model 70 was eventually replaced by the Remington Model 700, which was standardized as the M40 sniper rifle. The reasons for this change were practical rather than performance-based. Winchester had modified the Model 70's design in 1964, and the post-64 rifles lacked the quality of their predecessors. Remington, meanwhile, offered a reliable design that could be produced in military quantities with consistent specifications. The M40 and its variants have served American forces ever since. But the legacy of the mail-order rifle endures. John George proved on Guadalcanal that individual marksmanship could be decisive even in an age of automatic weapons and massed firepower. He demonstrated that quality equipment properly employed by trained personnel could multiply the effectiveness of infantry forces. He showed that sometimes the best solution to a military problem came not from official channels, but from individuals who understood the reality of combat. The Japanese snipers who terrorized the 132nd Infantry near Point Cruz believed they had found an unbeatable advantage in the jungle environment. Their patience, their concealment, their willingness to wait for the perfect shot had made them seemingly invincible. Then a young lieutenant with a civilian hunting rifle entered their domain and systematically eliminated them. The hunters became the hunted. The predators became prey. The psychological impact of this reversal extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. War is ultimately a human endeavor, fought by individuals whose courage, skill, and determination shape outcomes that no amount of industrial capacity or technological superiority can guarantee. The mail-order rifle that John George carried to Guadalcanal represented something important about the American approach to warfare. It was not issued by the government. It was not designed by military engineers. It was a personal choice made by a man who understood his craft and refused to compromise his effectiveness for the sake of conformity. The officers who mocked George's rifle learned a lesson that military organizations often resist. Expertise matters. Individual capability matters. The man behind the weapon is more important than the weapon itself. George had spent years developing his skills with that specific rifle. He understood its characteristics, its limitations, its potential. That understanding made him lethal in ways that no standard issue equipment could replicate. Modern military forces have largely incorporated this lesson into their doctrine. Special operations units select their own weapons and equipment, choosing tools optimized for specific missions rather than accepting standardized solutions. Sniper programs emphasize individual skill development over equipment standardization. The relationship between shooter and rifle is recognized as fundamental to effective precision marksmanship. These developments trace directly to experiences like John George's on Guadalcanal. The mail-order rifle that his fellow officers dismissed as a toy helped establish principles that continue to guide military marksmanship training today. A civilian hunting rifle, purchased with 2 years of National Guard pay, proved itself superior to officially sanctioned military equipment in the most demanding combat conditions. The story challenges comfortable assumptions about institutional competence and individual initiative. George's account, in Shots Fired in Anger, provides detailed insight into the mental and emotional dimensions of combat marksmanship. Looking through a scope at another human being, centering the crosshairs on flesh and bone, squeezing the trigger while knowing the consequence, these actions carry moral weight that no amount of training can entirely eliminate. George wrote honestly about this burden, about the strange intimacy of killing at a distance, about the way the scope magnifies not just the target, but the humanity of the person you are about to end. This honesty distinguished his book from much war writing of the era. Many accounts glorified combat or sanitized its realities. George presented the experience as he had lived it, with fear and doubt, alongside courage and determination. He acknowledged that killing affected him, even when the killing was justified and necessary. He explored the psychological mechanisms that allowed soldiers to function under conditions of extreme stress. His insights remain relevant for anyone seeking to understand the human cost of warfare. The tactical lessons George taught also endured. His emphasis on patience, on observation before action, on target selection based on enemy capability rather than opportunity, these principles became standard elements of sniper doctrine. His methods for identifying enemy sniper positions, for predicting where opponents would hide, for conducting counter-sniper operations in jungle environments, all were documented and disseminated. The sniper section George established on Guadalcanal was among the first systematic American sniper programs of the war. Before his intervention, sniping was an individual activity conducted by soldiers who happened to have the skills and equipment. After his success, it became an organized military function with dedicated personnel, specialized training, and defined doctrine. This transition reflected a broader recognition that precision marksmanship was not obsolete in modern warfare, but rather essential to certain types of operations. The jungle environments of the Pacific War demanded capabilities that standard infantry doctrine could not provide. Dense vegetation negated the advantages of massed firepower. Hidden enemies could not be suppressed by volume of fire if their positions were unknown. Air support and artillery were limited in their effectiveness against dispersed opponents concealed by natural cover. In this environment, the individual marksman became a critical asset, capable of reaching into places that no other weapon system could affect. George understood this reality before most of his contemporaries. His insistence on bringing his personal rifle despite official disapproval reflected a conviction that he knew what worked, regardless of what regulations said. This kind of individual initiative is uncomfortable for military organizations, which depend on standardization and discipline to function effectively. But it is also essential because warfare constantly presents situations that regulations never anticipated. The mail-order rifle that terrified Japanese marksmen was, in one sense, just a hunting rifle. A commercial product designed for sporting purposes, purchased through normal retail channels, maintained with civilian gunsmithing techniques. But in the hands of John George, it became something more. It became a weapon system optimized for a specific operator, refined through years of practice, employed with lethal expertise against enemies who never expected to face such capability. The Winchester Model 70 lives on today as one of the most respected bolt-action rifle designs ever produced. The pre-64 versions, built to the same specifications as George's rifle, are prized by collectors and shooters who appreciate their quality. The rifle's reputation as the rifleman's rifle reflects its performance in both sporting and military applications. John George returned home after the war, carrying memories that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The men he had trained, the enemies he had eliminated, the wounds he had suffered, all became part of a story that he eventually shared through his writing. His book preserved experiences that would otherwise have been lost, providing future generations with insight into a form of warfare that remains both ancient and eternally modern. The sniper's craft has not changed fundamentally since George stalked Japanese marksmen through the jungles of Guadalcanal. The equipment has improved. The optics are clearer, the rifles more accurate, the support systems more sophisticated. But the essential elements remain constant: patience, observation, precision, the willingness to wait for the right moment, and the skill to execute when that moment arrives. These qualities cannot be issued from supply. They must be developed through practice and proven in combat. John George proved his qualities in the most demanding test imaginable. He entered a killing zone where enemy snipers had established dominance, armed only with a rifle his superiors had dismissed as inadequate. He emerged victorious, having eliminated 11 enemy marksmen and established a sniper program that would influence American tactics for decades. The mail-order sweetheart that Captain Morris had ordered him to leave in his tent became a legend. Warfare is full of stories about individuals who made differences that no one expected. David, facing Goliath. Leonidas at Thermopylae. Single soldiers changing the course of battles through courage and determination. John George belongs in this tradition, a rifleman who refused to accept limitations that others considered absolute. His Winchester Model 70, purchased with savings from a National Guard salary, outperformed weapons designed by military engineers and approved by procurement boards. The lesson is clear. Sometimes the best equipment is not what the institution provides. Sometimes it is what the individual knows will work. If this story has moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with others who appreciate military history. The legacy of men like John George deserves to be remembered. The morning of January 22, 1943 began with American soldiers dying under Japanese sniper fire. It ended with the beginning of the end for Japanese sniper dominance on Guadalcanal. Between sunrise and sunset, a young lieutenant with a hunting rifle had changed the tactical equation, demonstrating capabilities that no one in his chain of command had believed possible. The mail-order rifle that became a legend was never officially adopted, never standardized, never approved for military service. It did not need to be. In the hands of John George, it was enough.